All right, so before we get started, we'll pause for a minute. We'll reflect upon the fact that there is a power and a presence for good that's available to each and every one of us. As we open ourselves up to it, as we expand our consciousness, open our hearts and our minds to allow the greater good of God to express in our life by expressing through our life, as we realize within ourselves on a conscious level that which we truly are, the truth of who we are, that we can embody and embrace that internal understanding and consciousness of the divine principle expressing through us, and we can be directive in our own life experience. We can begin to understand that because we are God expressed as us, we can know that we should experience a greater degree of livingness, a greater degree of perfection in our life, a greater degree of abundance, a greater degree of health. And as we do that, we claim our greater good, we embrace our greater good, and we see it demonstrated in our life. We come together to study, to learn, to share, and to grow. And today we're doing that. And I release this to God in thanksgiving, and so it is.
So it is.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about something that I've been talking about for a while. It's something that as I was learning and beginning to understand religious science, science of mind and spirit, it was brought up, we talked about it, there was a certain level of emphasis that was placed on it, and then we moved on to other things. And it's this thing that we call race consciousness. And when we're talking about race consciousness, we're talking about the human race, not racial consciousness. Although, in effect, racial consciousness is kind of a subset of race consciousness. In the greater expansion of things, race consciousness entails the whole human race. But we also have a national race consciousness, we have a local race consciousness, a societal race consciousness, a community race consciousness, and we have a family race consciousness. And what this is essentially is kind of a collection, if you will, of thoughts. We teach that thoughts are things. We just recently talked about the power of thought. But when we think thoughts, they don't just go to nowhere. They become part of the race history, if you will, of thought. Jung, in the early part of the 20th century, he hypothesized what he called the collective unconscious. Holmes talked about race conscious. Today, epigeneticists are talking about the epigenetic consciousness that we inherit. Now, it doesn't make any difference which one of those things we're talking about. The effect that they talk about is the same. So the cause may be any one of those or even something else that we don't understand. But there is an effect that expresses in each and every living human being on the face of the earth something that they aren't necessarily aware of, something that has a major effect in their life experience, particularly if they live in a degree of ignorance, and something as we begin our journey in this new thought, this philosophy of life wherein we begin to seek to express a greater, more abundant, more positive, health-filled life that we need to know about. We need to know about it because it has such a powerful effect. When people begin to experience new thought, race conscious, or spiritual mind, and they get all excited about it, they put their minds, their lives in alignment with this idea that they can treat, they can know, they can have a positive level of consciousness, and that they have an expectation to see this unfold and demonstrated in their life. And early on, oftentimes, they see a measure of return upon their change in thinking, and they get excited about it. But at some point in time, as often happens, it's like they run up against a wall. Things aren't unfolding in their life the way that they were to begin with. And they begin to wonder if maybe it's not working. Well, it's working, but it's working and it's kind of come up against a wall, if you will, okay? And the wall, part of that wall is in our subconscious, our subjective mind. that which exists there that we're not even aware of. And that's where race consciousness lives within each and every one of us. There was a movie that came out quite a few years ago with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson, and I think it was called A Few Good Men. I'm not sure, but if you saw the movie, it takes place with Tom Cruise plays a Navy attorney, and Jack Nicholson is a Marine commander of a base, and most of it, or a lot of it's taking place in a court scene. And at some point, as the tension is building towards the end of this movie, Tom Cruise has got Jack Nicholson on the stand, and he's going after him. He's grilling him hard, and he screams, I want to know the truth. And Nicholson kind of gets in his face, and he said, you remember that? Yeah, and Nicholson gets in his face. He says, you can't handle the truth. Okay? And in truth, no pun intended, that's what happens to us oftentimes. And you'd think, well, if I'm unfolding my ideas, my consciousness opening up to something that is so good in my life that I can speak my word, that I have a right to see an intention, to see an expectation, to see a demonstration in my life, how is it that you could say, I can't handle the truth? Well, this is where this understanding of how race consciousness affects us. Because you see, race consciousness, although it has a positive side to it, there's a lot of positive, thought in that race consciousness. But there's a lot of negative thought in it. And that negative thought that's in it, if you will, gets into our minds a lot easier than the positive does, because our brains are kind of designed for awareness of negativity. Because back in the day when everybody lived in caves, we needed to be very afraid of things out there that we didn't know what it was. So we have a trigger within ourselves that if we don't know what something is, we tend to be afraid of it. And that fear consciousness, that fear of thought, it feeds into this acceptance of what we call negativity. Because in truth, all negativity that comes into our life is some form of fear that we've embodied. Whether it be a belief in limitation. Well, if we believe in limitation, we're afraid that there's not enough to go around, for example. And so there's this thing that we call race consciousness. And it lives and breathes within each and every one of us. When we start our journey in spiritual mind treatment, when we start our journey in science of mind and spirit, we need to be aware that it's there. Now, it's not so powerful that it can keep us from doing and achieving and demonstrating good. It's not so powerful that it overwhelms us, to a point of hopelessness. The truth about it is that every one of us has the ability to overcome it. Every one of us has the ability to see a greater truth. Every one of us has that, because that is the Christ within, the God within us that seeks to express itself in our life so that we live a life at a higher, more livingness consciousness. But what happens? We start our journey, and things are going good, and then all of a sudden they're not going good. Why is that? I use as an example oftentimes when I teach the idea of a thermostat. Thermostats are really nice at home. They have a high cutoff and a low cutoff. And in between the two, there's this thing we call our comfort zone. So, as long as the temperature stays in here, the air conditioner, the heater stays off. If it drops down here, it gets too cold, the heater comes on. If it gets up here, it's too hot, and the air conditioning comes on, right? Well, it's the same way within us, in consciousness. We have our comfort zone. As long as we are in this zone, we're okay. In truth, we're not living the life that we're supposed to be living, but we've settled, if you will. This is comfortable. I don't have to do anything. But if my life experience falls below my comfort zone, I don't even have to be aware of it, and all of a sudden my consciousness kicks in, and I'm doing things a little more energetic. I'm maybe looking to mend some fences over here. Anything, whatever it takes to get myself back up into the comfort zone. So we're good with that. It's easy to understand. If we're in an uncomfortable place, sure, we want to be back in our comfort zone. But the problem is that when we pop above this, when we're more successful than what our comfort zone defines as where we should be, if we're experiencing more good, more love, more health, more prosperity, whatever it is, if we're experiencing more and it's above our comfort zone, we begin to self-sabotage. Okay? Because we're seeking to bring ourselves back in here because that's our comfort zone. Why do we do that? We do that because this concept of race consciousness tells us that this is where this is at. Race consciousness is something that we don't learn, we're not indoctrinated with per se, but it's something that when we come into the world, it's already there within us. Okay, Holmes says it's within the subjective mind. Young says it's in our, basically in our DNA, and we inherit it. Doesn't make any difference. All the good, all the bad that humanity has experienced on some level is available to us. And if it's bad, you can see how this can be really bad when we're trying to create a consciousness of more positive, more harmony, more peace, more love. God expresses as us, expressing through us, and we are the filter that keeps God from expressing maximally. You have to understand that, because that filter is controlled by our subjective mind more than our conscious mind. Our subjective mind defines who we are. It's what sets the limits on this comfort zone. And if it says you've got more good than what you deserve, okay, because you are this, that, or the other, and we have a whole bunch of definitions that individuals define themselves by, that keep themselves by definition separate from a greater whole, a unity, a oneness, a recognition of the truth of who and what they are. And they live in that level of separateness, and as a result, they don't get the apple. They don't get the ring. They don't get the good. Because they're here, and they're separate. Because race consciousness tells us that we're separate. One of the things that you can tie race consciousness to on a certain level is a consciousness or an understanding of tribalism. Again, going back to when humanity was still kind of running around in caves and maybe they just moved out of caves, we all had our tribe. And as long as we lived in the tribe, we were comfortable. The next tribe down the way, they were different than us. We were to fear them, maybe go to war and all this other stuff. It was a negative deal. Well, we moved beyond that as humanity, and we moved into cities, and we had countries and kings and wars, and we moved beyond that, but we still had wars. We still had countries. Right up to the current day. We're still experiencing that. And the reason why we're experiencing that is because people believe that they're different. They believe that we're not part of the same wholeness. Everybody still has some level of understanding of who and what their tribe is, and they associate with that first before they associate with God. Now they'll tell you if they're people that experience a spiritual life that they associate with God first, but oftentimes their actions reveal something different. And that difference is they're tied to their tribe first. And when you tie yourself to your tribe, you're not part of God's wholeness. Okay? Understanding that when we're part of God's wholeness, as Jesus taught when He came into the world, that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. The radicalness, I've talked about Him being a radical rabbi. The radicalness of this was when you begin to understand that the God of the Old Testament, the Hebrew God, got its start as a tribal God. It was a tribal war God. Throughout the whole Old Testament, God is still portrayed in kind of that concept. That was the Hebrew God. The God of the Hebrews, separate from all others. When Jesus came in, He said, you know what? We're all part of the family. We're all one. God is not a God of just a group. God is the God of all of us. God is the God of life. God is the God of good. And as you believe it is done unto you, just, wow, wipe the whole slate clean on that old God from the Hebrews, which is why they had to take Him out. Someone asked me the other day, why is it that Well, one, they asked me if I thought Jesus was real, because there's some people that have made the claim, the statement that he wasn't. Yes, I believe he was real. Two, I do believe that he taught what he taught. Maybe not exactly in the words that are handed down through the New Testament, but we've got enough different cross-references that we can pretty much get the gist of what he taught. So we've got that. If he lived and if he taught what he taught, why did he go to the cross? And we're kind of getting close to Easter, so this is not a topic that's too far off time-wise. And my response to that is, as I've read and studied, I believe that he knew going into Jerusalem, just like it said in the New Testament, that he was going to run up against the powers that be. But he was bringing this teaching that he, not only did he believe, but he brought miracles in the world. He healed people. And that was another question that was asked to me. Do I believe that he did the miracles that he did? Yes, I do. And the reason why is because, when something is so outlandish, outrageous, that tends to be, as it's transmitted from one group to another over a period of time. The most outrageous things are always the things that kind of stay in the story, regardless of whatever happens to the story. So yeah, I believe he did the miracles. And he did the miracles, and he taught what he taught, because he got connected outside of race consciousness, if you will. He got connected with God on a level that heretofore at that point was extremely rare. It happens once in a while. History tells us of other individuals that discovered the same thing and taught pretty much the same thing, but nobody did it as concisely and in the way that he did to a world that was ready for the message. So when the day came, when he went into Jerusalem, yeah, I believe he knew he was going to run up against the power structure, if you will. And I know that when he went into the temple and he tore everything out and he threw his temper tantrum and he said, you got to get rid of this stuff because this is not what God's about. He knew he was going to have to stand for his beliefs. Yeah. And he did. And back in the day, what happened. He taught what he taught because he had, like I say, he had transcended that which we call race consciousness. And he realized the power, the truth that existed within him. And he shared that truth. And that truth is available to us today just as it was back in the day when he walked the face of the earth. But there's so much stuff. Here's an example, something that was brought to mind as I was reading something. We all accept the fact that there's disease in the world, right? There's cancer, there's all these other different diseases. We accept that. Now in New Thought, religious science, we treat for it. And as we treat for it, we say there's nothing to be healed but the truth to be revealed. And that is true. That's where we got to get in our mind. But what we have to do to get to that point in our mind, and I'm going to address that here momentarily. I'm going to read you a little bit out of how to use the science of mind. To get there in our mind, we have to put away in our mind the effects that race consciousness has. Because race consciousness tells us that there's disease in the world. Race consciousness tells us there's limitation in the world. And because we accept that, we being humanity-wide, those diseases exist as conditions and effects, when in fact they're not based in truth. They're not based in the God's energy, God's love, God's creativeness coming into the world. But we accept that as being so. So when we get into New Thought, when we get into religious science, and we start talking about there really isn't any limitation. There really isn't disease, and we go on and on about these various things. And people will say, well, yeah, what about evil? And let's take this idea of evil for a minute. I've shared with you what Christian Larson says about beliefs that we hold that we aren't aware that we hold. I'm going to read it to you again because it's going to kind of set up where I'm going next. We have to understand this as we're walking our spiritual path, as we're seeking to demonstrate and create more good in our life. And what Larson says, he says, what we believe yesterday, we frequently discard today, and what we believe today, we are quite liable to discard tomorrow, possibly with few exceptions. Nevertheless, while the beliefs of today remain, we are so thoroughly convinced that they are true that practically nothing can change our minds. In fact, our present beliefs sometimes have such a powerful hold upon our minds that we have absolutely no desire to think differently from what we do, and what is more, those very beliefs as a rule refuse to be examined. It certainly is mental bondage with a vengeance when a mind dare not examine the credentials of its own beliefs and is so completely under the control of its own convictions that it is unable to question their genuineness or authenticity. When we realize that we're subject to this thing called race consciousness, when we realize that that what we're subject to is beliefs that we hold, those beliefs limit us. So as we begin to become practitioners, and I include all of us in that, there are licensed, there are credentialed practitioners, but each and every one of us, as you put this into practice in your life, as you take, and this is why it's important that we take each and every day and we pause, we meditate, we do affirmative treatment, we claim the day when we awake in the morning, and we give thanks for the day when we go to bed at night, because every one of these things, it's affirming something. It's affirming something to something. And that what it's affirming to is to that within ourselves, where our beliefs reside. So we start working on changing our beliefs. And we maybe move a little bit out of our comfort zone. What happens when we get to the upside of our comfort zone? We begin to self-sabotage. Well, how do you do that when you're working on creating a greater, more abundant, more prosperous life? Well, I don't have time for meditation today. I didn't get my affirmations done today. I'll do them tomorrow. And we begin to put things, we don't even think about it. It's very subtle, very sly, and it works against us, right? Now then, think about this. If we took that idea and then we gave it an anthropomorphic beingness, we would call it Satan. We would call it the devil. It's not real. We don't believe in it. We know that with God there's only love. But as an experiential thing, what has happened to humanity is there has been this entity-like thing that has worked against it, experiencing and expressing good. So we called it the devil. There is no devil. But there is that within us that seeks to limit us, to keep us in that definition, level of ignorance, so that we don't get outside of our comfort zone. Okay? You have to understand that. So, as you begin to work, you work on your daily practices, your spiritual practices. You study. You do your affirmations. You do your meditation. You do your affirmative treatment. You greet the day before you open your eyes with thanksgiving and knowing and speaking your word that God has given you and gifted you this day to experience a greater good, greater livingness in your life today. And you end your day in thanksgiving. You end your day being thankful for the good, reviewing what you had in your day that you can really attribute to the good of this life experience, and that which you experienced in the day for which you may have had issues and obstacles with, you speak your word that you will be divinely guided. You'll speak your word that you're divinely guarded, and that there is a power and a presence for good that will express you have a bigger God than whatever that was, whatever it's going to be tomorrow. You're geared up, you're ready to go. Fine. Again, if you get separated from that, if you get busy, there really is something within you that's telling you it's just not that important. You're just not that important. Okay? There's another factor with this. One of the things that I haven't really focused on to a great extent, but you're here today. You know what the importance? I used to talk to Dr. Pizzello up at the Emerson Institute about people showing up on Sunday. And what he said was, in New Thought and religious science, when we gave up the concept of sin and hell, we gave up our hook to keep people, coming back through the door. And in a sense, that's kind of true. You know, I mean, let's face it, if you're worried about spending an eternity in a place that you really don't want to be, that might encourage you to get out every Sunday, even if you want to sleep in. But here's another reason for showing up on Sunday. This is even more important. Because when you show up, what happens? Okay, you got to listen to me. We got that. But beyond that, what you're doing is you're spending time with like-minded people. When I started this, I said race consciousness is not just negative. Race consciousness has a positive component. Race consciousness being, and I broke it down. We got, humanity, we got national, blah, blah, blah. But we have a race consciousness within this room. Okay? That consciousness within this room is a consciousness of understanding the truth of who we are, that we are all one, that there is no difference. We're all God expressed as us. And this is reaffirmed to you each and every time you show up here on Sunday. That's how important it is. And if I didn't make that real clear, it's very important because you need that reaffirmation. So that as you're working on your own, those race conscious thoughts that are trying to defeat you from experiencing life at a greater degree, experiencing health at a better degree, experiencing prosperity at a better degree. If you are having trouble, this is the place where you get a reset on that. This is the place where you get to talk to people that are also on this same spiritual journey. This is the place where you can sigh and go, okay, maybe I only made it through Wednesday last week, but I've got my batteries recharged now, and I'm ready to take on next week. And if I can make it to Wednesday plus, I'm ahead of the game. And eventually you'll head Wednesday plus, and you'll be here the following week, and you go, I made it through the entire week. I experienced, I expressed, and I accepted a bigger God, a greater God, and it is expressing in my life by expressing through me. That's when you begin to throw off the effects of race consciousness. But, and this is the big but, what often happens, people begin to express their good, and they get comfortable. They've raised their comfort zone a little bit. It's no longer down here, it's up here, so they're living at this level. But they're comfortable. I'm experiencing a little more financial abundance. I've got this great relationship going on. My health is good. I'm here. You're not supposed to live in your comfort zone. You're supposed to live in a zone of continuing to thrive, continuing to meet conditions that are going to require that you have to put out a little bit more, that you have to express a little bit more. And the reason for that is God wants you to express greater and higher degree of livingness so that as you do this, God experiences life through you at a greater and higher degree. But also God has provided you everything that you could need, want, and desire to overcome that. And God wants you to know about that. Yes. And most of us fail to realize. We've got God on our side, Spirit, whatever you want to call it George. I don't care what you call it, it's there, it's available, and it's always available. 24/7, you're never without it. When you are in that dark place, when you're feeling separate, pause. Tell yourself, even if you're a little unsure, tell yourself, I got a bigger God. Regardless of what it is, I got a bigger God. Regardless how it hurts, I got a bigger God. That's a practice. And as you practice that, you will get better. You'll get stronger. So that as life brings things at you, and believe me, life brings things at us. We can't control that. What we can do is control where we're at in consciousness. As we do this, see, here's the thing. Everybody sitting here today, no matter where you're at, there's a better life available to you. And there's some part of you that would really like to experience that better life. And it doesn't make any difference if you're this big, or if you're this big, or this big, or this big. Whatever. It doesn't make any difference. We all want to experience a better life if we're truthful with ourselves. And there's only one way to do that. Now, there are ways that you can experience more stuff in your life, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a better life. A better life is a life that's in harmony with principle. A better life is a life that realizes and recognizes that God is expressing through you, that you have tools available to you, that you are constantly being guided and guarded in all that you do, that you have a player on your team that is indefeatable, and that you can go to that player at any time, matter of fact, all the time, if you can really wire yourself in, and you know that you're never separated. You're never separate from God. You're never separate from God's creation, because we're all one. The entire creation. Which means everything in God's creation is available to us. But we've got to claim it. We've got to claim it. And we claim it in belief. We claim it in faith. We grow our belief as we begin to transcend the thoughts and beliefs that have held us back. So our spiritual journey is a journey. It's a journey of achieving. It's a journey of overcoming. It's a journey of learning and growing. And it's our journey. It's not a journey that someone else can do for us. You know, it'd be nice if you could just sit in the, like when I was a kid and I used to put my sister in a wagon and she could go wherever I went because all I had to do was drag her along. However, if I got tired of dragging, I could let her go and she had to deal with that, right? This brings us back to knowing the truth. You know, most of us, at some level, have difficulty standing up and recognizing the truth. Wanting to know the truth. Because to know the truth, and Jesus tells us when we know the truth, it sets us free. But to know the truth means we have to accept that there are certain things that we have accepted in our life, certain things that we've believed in our life, that we want to hang on to. You know, I don't want to let go. You know, I'm part of this tribe, whatever that tribe is. They're my bros, or they're my this, they're my blood. You know, it doesn't make any difference. I don't want to let go of them. I want to hang on to it, because that's where I get my identity from. Well, I don't get my identity from that. I get my identity from God. But that's what I believe. And my beliefs will fight within me to hold that position, to keep me there, that I am this, and I don't want to let it go. Think about the risk of letting it go. Think about the risk of however you self-define today, putting that on the shelf and standing there essentially, emotionally and spiritually naked to the world. Vulnerable. And you think, oh my God. And that's it. Oh my God. Oh wow. And then you realize that one, you're not alone. Two, you're not naked. You're, as they say, you are fully clothed. You are provided for. And that is the power of coming to that realization. Now, as I was reviewing and studying for talking about this, if you happen to have a copy of How to Use the Science of Mind, this is probably Holmes's greatest or best treatise on understanding it from our perspective. And Holmes says, the law of mind can know the individual only as he or she knows themselves. Otherwise, it would not be a law. It would be just a person. It is upon the impersonality of the law that the practitioner relies. And remember, as we put this into practice, we're all practitioners. Okay? But it must also be realized that the individual subconsciously knows or believes much about himself or herself that contradicts this true spiritual nature. We believe so much about ourselves that is in opposition to our truth. And every one of those beliefs is a shackle, a link in the chain that holds us in bondage. And as we grow spiritually, we break those chains. Sometimes, for some people, they can get rid of it all in one great, grand, fell swoop. For most of us, it's like you break a chain and the darn thing reconnects. You break it and it reconnects. It's an ongoing journey and battle, if you will, but if you stick with it. And coming here and, again, meeting with like-minded people helps you do that. Knowing that there's that within you that's going to effectively work to stop you, defeat you, teach you that what you thought you were learning here isn't true, that life is incredibly tough, it's incredibly difficult, you're on your own, and if you don't have your tribe, whatever that is, you're just out of luck. Period. Because that's the way society has been. That's been the belief. Because people that understood the truth of this were far and few between. The teaching has been there. The lessons have been there. But there's a great deal of chaos and noise that keeps us in the dark, if you will. There was a time back in the early to the mid part of the 20th century when spiritual growth in this country was on the rise. And when I say spiritual growth, I'm talking in all levels, in all faiths. We experienced more harmony, more peace within our country than at any other time. Then my generation, go figure, right? We got our nose bent out of shape, whatever. We had our reasons, some were excuses, but what we did as a generation is we began to move away from spiritual beliefs. Now, a lot of that was not people going, well, I'm going to be an atheist. It was just, I don't need to go to church. I don't need to associate. Remember what I was telling you about being here and associating, how important it is. For all people, having a spiritual connection, and I don't care what it is. You know, it can be Buddhism, it can be Islam, it can be, well, I don't know about Catholicism. No, it can be Catholicism, it can be anything. If you have that connection, you're still tied into source. You're still tied into first cause. Maybe their story's a little bit different than ours, but you know what? At some point you're going to realize that there's a greater truth beyond the story that even what we're telling here. We can share what we think we know. And I think that we seem to know more in New Thought, but that's my belief. Whatever your belief is, you know, you hook up with it. People got away from that. They got away from having a spiritual understanding in the world, and as they did, even the things that we teach. And our New Thought centers begin to downsize, if you will. Churches also. And the world is in a greater degree of chaos. It's in a greater degree of chaos because this concept of race consciousness, where at one time there was a larger group of people that still had a understanding of spirituality, their spiritual connectedness to God, to Source, that chaos was not so strong. People believed back at that time, Ernest Holmes believed that with the growth of science of mind and spirit that we would reach a point, and he believed before the time that we're at now, but we would reach a point where there'd be enough people on the face of the earth. And you see, we don't have to be the majority of people on the face of the earth. And when I say we don't have to be the majority of people, I'm not talking about in this next phase of what I'm going to talk about that we convert everybody to our beliefs. That's not the point. What we know is that if a significant portion of a population begins to experience and believe in a greater good, there is a generalized acceptance of a greater good in the total population. You know, if you're familiar with the story of the 100th monkey or the Maharishi effect, and basically, you know, the stories tell us that when a very small, like 1% or 1/10 of the population makes that shift in consciousness in a positive way, the whole population experiences an uplift. But we've gotten away from that. So you see more discord, disharmony in the world today. People are expressing hate at a much higher degree. You know, there was a time when we could have conversations and, you know, there was disagreement. Maybe there was even blustering and puffing up and, you know, a lot of passion. But there wasn't hate like there is today. This is why I say when we talk about being here, as you let your light shine brighter, effectively you are changing the world. A singular you. Raising your energy, consciousness, accepting a greater good, a greater understanding, stepping away from the negative beliefs of race consciousness, you are changing the world. And as a side benefit, you're also changing your life. Did I get that backwards? No, I don't think so. Because as we change the world, we're changing the consciousness of God's creation. Think about that. You are that powerful to have that effect. You know, whether you want to call it the Maharishi effect, whether you want to call it the butterfly effect. Okay? So Holmes goes on to say, accumulated experience of the whole race is lodged in the subconscious of everyone and operates through everyone until a passageway is cleared back through the mind to the spiritual presence which has never been affected by the race thought. In other words, within yourself is that point of perfection that you can get back to. This is your spiritual journey, if you will. We can all get there. We can get there in varying degrees, in varying times. But if we know and we hold that as our goal, recognizing that we are expressing God in our life, recognizing that we are expressing a greater life, and recognizing that within ourselves is the destination to our journey, and we hold to that, we make that connection at higher and greater degrees. I'm not going to go through and read all this. I'll probably give a class on the book once we get the rest of the building squared away. But I just want to touch on a couple of things. Because everyone is an individual and cannot wait until the collective unconsciousness of the whole race is cleared up, everyone must break down the barriers which tie him or her to the race beliefs. And in so doing, he or she will not only be healing themselves on the mesmeric effect of race thought, he or she will also be contributing to the final redemption of the whole race. And that's what I was just talking about. Right. We free ourselves from that. You know, he calls it the mesmeric, the hypnotic, call it what you want. It's the power of beliefs that we hold. Beliefs that we don't necessarily know that we hold, but we can begin right now, today, in this place, in this time, to affect them and to create change. And if you are working, if you're traveling your journey and you find that you got a little bit of a difficulty, you pick up the phone, you call me, or you call Joanna, or you call Mickey. They're practitioners. I'm a practitioner. You reach out. Don't be thinking that you are alone, that you're without, that there's not help, because there is. I have people that, surprisingly from far off places that message me for treatment. No, I have no idea if the treatment... No. Well, I treat for them. And I've gotten positive feedback. I get positive feedback because there's a power, a presence for good that is available to each of us as we open ourselves up to it. And as you open yourself up to it, it is available to you, and it expresses through your life expression, that you may experience life at a greater, higher degree, greater abundance, greater health, greater happiness, more harmony, more good, more prosperity. And even if you get to that level, you're just starting. The level, as you move, the level moves. Yeah. See, when you tie yourself in to the divine principle, this comfort zone concept begins to go away as you begin to move up. At some point you go, wait a second, there is no ceiling. There's no place where I am limited. I can move beyond that. I claim that for myself. I own that for myself. And I have an intention and expectation to see it demonstrated. And I know that it is. And so it is.
And so it is. Yeah.
What I gave you in the handouts gives you more information. And I will be probably going into greater depth and addressing this in the next week or two. And hello, I'm the Reverend Steve Walling. I'm the host of Central Valley Talks, New Thought Talk with Rev Steve, that can be found on Central Valley Talk. We also have a YouTube page, and you can find us on the New Thought Talk Facebook page. We've been doing this now for, 6 or 7 years, and we have a bit of an archive of our shows, and you're welcome to come there and kind of peruse through them, and hopefully you'll find something that resonates with you, that if you're a New Thought student or practitioner, that will help you in your spiritual journey. As we do these shows, there is a certain amount of financial cost that's involved with doing this, and so I want to take this moment to give you the opportunity to help support us and support our ministry. You can do that through PayPal. we have a PayPal account there, and all you have to do is go to PayPal and enter our email address, which is madeirasac@gmail.com. I believe it's on the bottom banner there. You don't have to have a PayPal account to make a payment through PayPal. You can do it with a debit or credit card. You just have to scroll down to the bottom of their login icon there, and you'll find a link that you can do that with. We've been supported over the years through many donations and gifts, and I want to thank all the people that have supported us. Look forward to continuing as I'm making this particular notice at the beginning of 2019. I look forward to another year of sharing New Thought teachings, my understandings of what Ernest Holmes and various New Thought pioneers meant as they created their books and their ideas and their philosophies. It's a powerful, powerful spiritual tool. It empowers us as we make our own spiritual journey in life. And again, I want to thank you for being with us, and I want to thank those that have supported us and those that are going to support us. And I'll see you on the show. Thank you again.